Everybody. My name is Matthew, one of the instructors here at PDX Co Guild. Been teaching for a few years now. I'm happy to share my experience from my last job when I did interview a decent number of people. So yeah, my last job, I moved here from New Jersey about 5 years ago, and my job was in it was in a small web dev company in the NJIT business incubator. So like a business incubator is usually attached to a university. So this one was attached to NJIT. We mostly did ASP.NET, which uses C#. So it's kind of a, ASP.NET is to Django what, C# is to ASP.NET what Python is to Django. It's just a backend framework. So yeah, we hired a lot of students from the university. There was a lot of turnover as students would graduate and kind of move on. And for many of them, it'd be their first programming job, which came with its own unique set of challenges. There'd be a lot of hand-holding, a lot of onboarding. But overall, it was a pretty great experience. It was nice being a part of a learning environment. Everybody's kind of growing in their own way. So yeah, NJIT had a website that they would post jobs on for students. Students would send in their resumes. We'd pick out the best resumes and invite them in for an interview. We weren't necessarily looking for the most technically advanced, because a lot of the students, they didn't have much prior experience, so that we were much more interested in their ability to learn and whether they were like, they could be engaged in the material. So first thing we do is we'd invite them in we'd sort through their resumes, find the best ones, invite them in for an interview. And first thing that we do when they came in is we give them a little quiz with just some logic questions, so not even programming questions. And that just kind of served as a good first filter to check if they had, like basic reasoning skills, and they could like follow instructions. So that ruled out some people. Like there were questions, like I remember two of them. One of them was like, you have a 3-gallon and a 5-gallon jug. How do you make 4 gallons? You have to like fill one with water and dump the other one. I don't even remember exactly how to solve it. And the other one was called the farmer's dilemma. If y'all remember, if y'all have ever heard of that one, you have to cross a river and you have a fox, a hen, and a bag of seed, and you can't leave the hen with the seed, and you can't leave the fox with the hen. So, just some preliminary kind of logic questions to just, get a baseline on their reasoning skills. But anyway, so once they'd finished, we'd kind of look over that. We would ask some basic questions, getting more information on their prior work experience. Make sure they had basic communication skills, which is always important. We'd ask questions like, what is an example of a challenging problem you faced? What are you looking to get out of this job? What was your favorite part about your last job? Or what's your favorite part about programming? Things like that. And then usually we'd also do a little bit of whiteboarding. So we didn't really do much pseudocode because the job was specifically for C#. So oftentimes we would have them write code in C#, either on a laptop if they wanted to run it, or just on a whiteboard. And they were the typical kind of programming interview questions that you can find on like Code Wars. We also have I don't know if you all have seen that list that we have in our full stack curriculum, but you can check it out if you want. I'll post a link in the chat. Things like, remove the duplicates from an array, or, do a binary search, that kind of thing. And yeah, and that was usually kind of gave us a good sense of their reasoning skills and their prior programming skills. You might have heard this before, but it's definitely important when you with these interview questions, like demonstrating it's more important to demonstrate your reasoning skills than than just knowing the correct answer out of nowhere. So even if you don't know the correct answer, asking questions, and just kind of verbalizing and giving your interviewer some feedback as to how you're getting through the problem, rather than just pulling the answer out of thin air like a genius. Yeah, I guess some advice I would have, the nice part about programming jobs are that hard skills are fairly objective. You can't really lie about them, because in the interview you'll be talking with people who use these technologies every day. So they'll know immediately if you're lying or you're exaggerating or you use incorrect terminology and stuff like that. So that's kind of a nice part, I think, is you can't really hide that you don't know things, but it's fine to say that you don't know things. It's much better than not lying. And I also wanted to say, like, soft skills are super important too. They're kind of, and sometimes they're undervalued, I think, because if you don't have soft skills, you'll have, because a huge part of programming professionally is communication. You'll have to talk to your boss, your coworkers, your clients. You'll have to write a lot of emails. I took a lot of phone calls from clients. I went on meetings with clients. So yeah, the soft skills are definitely important. And when you're in the interviewer, your interviewer will be wondering, what's it going to be like working with this person every day? Is this person fun to work with? Do they seem like we get along? But yeah, and I went to school for computer science, and I met lots of people who were technically capable, but probably wouldn't function very well in a professional capacity. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for soft skills too. And I don't know. And also, like, I think networking is definitely more important than spamming your resume out there. Just going to meetups and connecting with people on LinkedIn, and yeah, they're also great opportunities to kind of practice your technical vocabulary. That's part of why we do so many presentations in the full stack course. Just using that technical terms in the correct way makes you sound intelligent, and leaves a good impression.
Can I ask a question here, Matt?
Yeah, what's up?
So first question, do you want this to be like an open forum for asking questions, or no? I'm not sure if you want us to.
Yeah, I'm totally happy with that.
Cool. Yeah, my second question is, so it sounds like what you're saying is that a lot of the tech interview questions are going to be just kind of logic communication based. So whether it's an abstraction or an actual coding thing, they're really just trying to see, no, not 100% did you get the right answer, but how do you communicate while you deal with a question?
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. Yeah, just sort of like, even if you don't know the answer, your interviewer will want to know, like, how would you go about solving it? What would be the first few steps that you would take? And I think most often they'd be willing to, like, kind of help walk you through it, especially if it was a very challenging problem. But of course,
I'm gonna say I'm assuming that they tend to give a lot of questions that are essentially above you and they know it, to just see how then you hit the wall and then how you react to their input and them trying to walk you forward. That's what I'm just assuming that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, that I could definitely see that happening too. I mean, the way we did it is we sort of kind of did both ends. We had very lowball questions, which some people floundered on. So, that was a good, easy way to eliminate possible candidates. But then, yeah, we would ask hard questions to really kind of challenge them and see how they can work through something that's new. And but yeah, I think verbalizing what your thinking process is probably the most important part of those questions, more than just knowing the correct answer. Cool. So that went a little bit fast. Does anybody have any other questions? Happy to talk about my prior experience at my last job and stuff.
I got a kind of.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're up.
All right, cool. Okay, so my question would be: you mentioned that networking is super important, but obviously it's a little bit difficult during the pandemic. Do you have any tips on like what good avenues to pursue that would be?
Before the pandemic, I used to go through meetup.com, which was pretty great. There's also Calligator, which I'm sure Sherry's probably recommended a couple times. But yeah, I think a lot of stuff's still going on Zoom. The pluses and the minuses of the pandemic. The minus is you can't meet in person. The plus is that everybody's online anyway, so you don't necessarily have to try to connect with people local to Portland. There's I don't know how to find meetups outside of Portland. I'm sure there's some broader ones out there. I'm sure there's ones for like niche topics. I think there's a few good subreddits too. There's r/CS career questions. There's r/learn programming. When I'm bored, sometimes I'll go on r/learn programming and answer questions just to get some practice and see what people are struggling with.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but I think
what I was going to ask is, I've kind of wondered this in general. How do we tend to line up with undergraduate applicants? I know it's kind of a different ballgame in some degree, but yeah, that'd be helpful for me to.
That's a good question. I went to school for computer science, so I think that the only difference between a bootcamp graduate and a university graduate is that the university graduate showed that they're willing to devote 4 years of their life and a lot more money to get to the same place. So I don't know. I think that carries some weight, as you apply for jobs, that you're willing to make that commitment going to university. But as far as like technical capabilities, I think probably within the same ballpark. Both going to university and graduating from a coding boot camp, the biggest thing you have against you is you don't have any prior experience, right? You have the technical skills, you might have a few cool projects, but you don't have any work experience. You don't have any prior job to say like, yeah, they can definitely code in a professional capacity. So I think that's the struggle for both of them, just getting like, even if it's unpaid, just get a first gig, just show that you wrote something that's used by real people in the real world and solved a real problem. I think it should be, the primary goal after you graduate. But yeah, so I don't know. I think it'll vary dramatically as far as opinions about, whether to hire a university student or whether to hire a bootcamp graduate. I don't know. I could imagine some people prefer one over the other, but yeah, just demonstrating that you have the capacity to learn, that you're eager to grow, and that those are your best assets.
One kind of follow-up question on that, I think it would be helpful for us. So obviously, I'm not going to let undergrad in computer science stop me from applying anywhere anyway.
Yeah.
But does a lot of employers, when they have that undergraduate required, are they going to consider that essentially parallel? I imagine not everyone's going to have the same answer, but is that something we can kind of expect? Or equivalent, I should say.
Yeah. I'm not sure about that, how different companies will see that. I know a lot of companies have they have some baseline requirements, and they will just simply throw out resumes that don't meet those requirements. So you might get thrown, you might have your resume thrown out immediately just because you don't have that degree. But that said, I have had students apply to jobs where they didn't meet the requirements and just were upfront about that like, oh, I don't have this, but is there any place you could stick me, any job that you could give me? And they ended up getting a job anyway. So yeah, it can't hurt to try. But if it does say, requirement, BS in computer science, that it's possible that they wouldn't even look at your resume. Because I know, especially online, if they get a lot of resumes, they're just going to look for any reason to just throw resumes out.
So what you're saying
Cool.
is my
Yeah.
Bachelor of Arts in Communication Studies is hurting me more than helping me.
What was it? Communication studies?
Communication Studies,
Yeah.
which is social science.
Well, like I said, communication is important. And I mean, not only in terms of like communicating with other, your coworkers and stuff, but when you design a web page, you have to think about how users are going to perceive that and understand it, and know what buttons to click. And hiring students out of a university, I definitely was aware that not all programmers know how to design a good web page. So it's definitely important too.
I understand branding really, really well, so I can brand the crap out of anything.
Yeah, that's great.
Are they usually pretty good about, or is it something that's kind of, I guess, professional or allowed, I guess, is kind of asking for feedback on how you did on all those, both the logic questions and kind of the more kind of coding related questions, like at the end of the interview, like asking, how did I do on those? Was those answers good enough? What could have been better? How could I have approached it better? That kind of thing.
Yeah, you can ask those sorts of questions. You don't want to ask like, am I going to get the job or not? But yeah, you can ask for feedback on stuff like that. And if you do get denied, you could always ask, what was it that that you thought really stood out? Why it wouldn't be a good fit for the job. So yeah, that's probably a good idea to just ask for a little feedback.
Matthew, what was the job where you felt like you grew the most, maybe earliest on in your career? And
Wait,
what was
who's getting interviewed here? The job where I grew the most.
as a developer, not as a person? But you can answer that too if you want.
Well, my first job, I actually got when I was a sophomore in high school. My friend's father owned a web dev company. So when I was 16, I started working for him, and he was a kind person, but he did kind of ascribe to a sink or swim sort of philosophy. And I just remember him, explaining exactly what he needed, and then he just walked away. And then it was just me in front of a computer, just having a panic attack. And so I think that was a good experience, just because, in the academic world, it's, we can be very handholdy, and there's always a right answer. And you're just meant to like kind of jump through the hoop and get the right answer, right? In the professional worlds, you just need to get it done, and it just has to work. And how you get there is much more open-ended. So I think that was probably my greatest growth experience, of just really understanding the difference between academic programming and professional programming, and just diving in head first and just throwing things against the wall until they stick. There was a lot of projects that I worked on, throughout my career that didn't necessarily know if there was a solution, if there was an actual way to do things. So that's kind of scary, but you just, and I kind of I try to make this a part of the course too, just getting over that deer in the headlights mentality. When you're faced with a problem and you just seize up and you're like, well, I don't know the answer. And you feel helpless, but just being able to push through that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Do you guys recommend taking the advanced course right after we finish full stack or wait a little bit?
It's sort of up to you. I think, the full stack course is Python and Django, and then the advanced course is Node and React. And I think it's good to have experience with another backend framework. You branch out a little bit. You can say that you have experience with 2 frameworks, and definitely when you learn your second framework, it's easier than when you learn your first. And I think Node and React are pretty hot these days. I see a lot of job postings for those. So I don't know. I could see kind of spending a little bit more time with Django and getting some personal projects under your belt, or I could see just staying in the academic mindset and sort of just continuing and taking it immediately afterwards. So just gotta see if it's right for you.
So I was finishing boot camp last week. What I'm doing right now is a lot of I kind of Googled how to make a good portfolio, and I realized okay, this is a few weeks worth of time, and I really want to make it very polished with some new projects as well. One of the things I'm kind of immediately wondering about is if you essentially use tutorials in any kind of way, how do you not use that and not get plagiarism, or how do you give credit where credit's due? Because right now I'm working on a real estate app that's pretty intense and impressive, but what I don't want to do is first off reveal myself as being a plagiarist, or just literally plagiarize. I want to find whatever is the healthy medium.
I think so. You followed a tutorial to build up this application?
Yeah, Udemy. I'm working on it right now. It's an Udemy class, basically. A lot of it is just Django. It's pretty much the same stuff we did in boot camp. So a lot of my kind of initial thought was, well, why don't I change it up a whole bunch and redo the project off memory, and obviously not steal the CSS and blah, blah, blah. But to some degree, I'm just kind of, I'm not quite sure where I'm going to sit with that. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, there's a broad variety in terms of quality tutorials. There's tutorials where it's okay, now copy paste this code in here and copy paste that code in there, where you don't actually learn anything. So I think as long as I would recommend just putting, if you do have your personal portfolio site and you put a little section for that project, I would recommend just saying that it is the product of taking a Udemy course. I think that's a good thing to put. Definitely, it shows that you built another project and you have more.
That makes sense. Like a product of it. And yeah, as I was saying, is it's not just going to be me copying and pasting pretty much anything. Well, at least by the time I put it in portfolio, I know, for instance, the Bootstrap, but I'll probably just do the entire CSS myself eventually, or the font awesome stuff, things like that.
Yeah, and you can add, it's a product of the Udemy course, but it's with significant limitations.
Yeah, and if you have a portfolio thing to put together, you can even have a section learning, and then you have all the projects that you did those tutorials for under that. What I've been trying to do is, once I finish a tutorial, I try to use the same technologies that are used there to make something else, even if it's just really quick. Just use that stuff to make a clone of something else that's like that, but using a different data set and that different color scheme and some different stuff like that. So, and then I keep those separate. So I'll be this is the tutorials and this is what I made from that kind of thing to show what I learned.
Cool. Yeah.
And you can even have you can even, if you had that listed, you could even say what I learned. This, and then the final product that you learned from that, something like that.
Cool.
We're at time, so.
Cool. Well, I hope that was helpful. Thanks, everybody. I thought you asked some good questions.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. And I don't know if you're going to stick around, but I'd like to have Evan go ahead and present. And then at the end, perhaps if there's a few minutes, maybe both of you could answer any other last minute questions.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Anyway, so thanks so much. It was really helpful to have you here. All right, Evan, you're
All right.
on.
Let's do it. All right, guys, I made a little slideshow to help me remember what I wanted to say. So let me share my screen here. And I'll just get right into it. I'm glad that Matthew's talk was different than mine because I was worried we were going to just say the same things because we didn't coordinate at all. But they're different. So I'm mainly gonna. Well, I'm just gonna skip the about me section and get right into it. So I'm not gonna talk about like applying for jobs and networking because that wasn't what I was tasked with. So I'm gonna spend the entire time focusing on what the technical interview process is actually like. And then another time, maybe I can talk about that other stuff. So this is what you should expect. I'm gonna talk about these 4 things, which are typically involved. Some companies skip one of these. Some companies add another step, but it's usually some variation of these. So I'm going to talk about all of these things, and you should basically expect to do all of these things in any given interview process. Usually starts with the phone screen, and that's just for weeding people out. Basically, sometimes that leads into a take home or a live interview. And sometimes maybe the take home will be after the live interview. Sometimes it'll be before, but it doesn't really matter. The point is the next step will be a filtering step as well. And then the next step, once again, the behavioral interview could be like a part of the same session as the technical interview, or it could come before. But anyway, each step is basically a filter, and each step, there will be less people moving on to the next step, and eventually somebody will get an offer in the end. All right, so for each one of these, I'm going to explain what it's like, what to expect. I'm going to give tips, and I'm also going to give examples of real questions I've actually been asked in that stage of the interview. And then at the end, I will open up for questions. So first things first, let's talk about the phone screen. So typically you're going to have them pitch you on the company and then basically be like, is this something you want to do? And then you'll be like, yes, that's why I applied. And then you will have some behavior questions and tech questions after that. And the tech questions in the phone screen are very different than the ones in the like the whiteboarding technical interview, which I'll talk about later. These ones are going to be more like knowledge-y and less like problem solving-y, if you know what I'm saying. So they're not going to ask you like, solve a problem, go. It'll actually be more like, describe how cookies work. And then you'll have to just, if you know it, you know it, and try your best. Or what is a closure if it's a JavaScript interview, that kind of stuff. So real questions I have been asked, what is a closure actually? But other questions that I put down here, they might say something like, I see you have Vue and React on your resume. Can you talk about the differences? And then based on what you say, they'll follow up with, that's just typically how it goes. They'll like follow up with something. They'll be like, oh, could you talk more about that? Like if you're like, oh, I really like the way the state management works or something, they might be like, yeah, what do you mean? Or can you talk more about that? So don't say things that you don't know what you're talking about, like, because they're going to ask you to follow up. And they're basically just seeing like, do you actually have experience with the thing that you said you have experience on? Because they're probably going off of your resume. If you say you're a web developer and you do JavaScript, they're probably going to ask you something about JavaScript or some framework or whatever, and you need to just be able to talk about it. You can look up these kind of things online. People have like lists, like common JavaScript questions, and you can just study those lists. But I don't know how often people reuse the same questions. I think it's more just be prepared to talk about the stuff on your resume is the best you can do. I don't know if it's worth trying to like memorize answers to stuff that you don't really understand. Probably not a good idea. Behavioral kind of questions they might ask is like, maybe you said you're a full stack developer. So like, okay, but by the way, these real examples, like I said, these are things I've actually been asked. All of the real examples you see on my slides are things I've actually been asked. So people have asked me, do you consider yourself more of a front end or back end? And that's probably because I put that I was a full stack developer, and maybe the role was for like front end, and they wanted to see like, am I actually passionate about front end, or am I just trying to accept anything and I'm not actually a front end person? So usually, my advice is mostly, to be honest, but also kind of try to say what you think they're going to want you to say. And sounding more passionate about the thing they want is always better than sounding ambivalent and sounding like you'll just do whatever they want you to do. Like, don't be like, oh, I'll just do anything, like whatever you need me to do. I would actually think it's better to be like, oh, I really like this more than that for this reason. And that's going to make them more excited to hire you. Obviously, they're going to say things like, what made you interested in applying for this position? So please have an answer for that, because they're going to ask you that like every time. All right. The take-home assignment, this will be more of a real-world project, like an actual app, which is very different than the kind of thing you'll be asked in the technical interview. That's, the whiteboarding style interview is much more of like a data structure, puzzle-y kind of question. The take-home is usually not that kind of question. Usually it's more of like a CRUD app or something that something like a to-do list or something. They might make it super open-ended, and then at that point, maybe it's just, I don't actually know, but maybe it's just like whoever goes above and beyond is what they're looking for. I'm not sure. That's what I usually do when it's open-ended. But sometimes I get asked like extremely specific things. So anyway, things I've been asked to do, I was asked to implement an app where users can upload an image and then it applies some effect to the image, like makes it look cool in some way, right? Just some random effect. And they're basically just seeing, that's just a CRUD app, right? Can you just like have the user save things and then can you like access it and do something to it and then display it later? Shuffle feature for a card game, that was an interesting one. They were specifically looking if I could write tests. So that was part of the assignment. They were like, do you know how to write tests, basically? And then write a parser for cron job files. That was probably the hardest question I've ever been asked to do because I didn't really know how to write a parser. And it was also timed at 24 hours and I spent like pretty much the whole 24 hours. I turned it in like the middle of the night when I just decided to go to sleep. And I actually completed it, but I did not get the offer probably because the code was really bad. All right, let's talk about the whiteboard interview though. This is probably the most interesting section and the hardest to prepare for a bootcamp grad, I would think. So they're gonna basically ask you a lot of the time, not always, to write it on a whiteboard. Now, if it's a remote interview, they will have you do it in like a Google Doc. This is what has been happening to me more recently since the coronavirus thing. I'm not applying anymore because I recently accepted a job that I do in the mornings before I teach the evening class. But like, for example, at that company, they had me code up the solution in a Google Doc, which is surprisingly hard if you're not used to that because you're used to your text editor with the syntax highlighting, with the hotkeys that you know, with the fonts exactly how you like. Everything is just how you like. And when you're put in a Google Doc or in person when it's a whiteboard, the coding experience is so different that many people find it disorientating and it affects their ability to solve the problem. So you can get over this if you just practice it. It's not like you're learning to program from scratch again. You already know how to program. You just have to get comfortable typing your code in a Google Doc instead of your text editor. It doesn't take that much practice. Same with the whiteboard, actually. It doesn't take that much practice. I would just practice with my friend, like after school, back when I was in college, and we would just practice, give each other questions and just write code on the whiteboard. It doesn't take that long to get good at it. So just practice it. Also, it kind of translates. If you practice on the whiteboard a lot, then you'll probably be pretty good at the Google Doc version too, but you should probably just practice that also. All right, so the common whiteboarding interview questions are basically things that involve knowledge of data structures. And that's why college grads have an advantage, is because they take a class in college called data structures where you just learn these things. But you can always just teach yourself. It's not that hard. But it's like a thing that you're gonna have to do if you want to pass these. Now, not all companies actually ask questions like this. You might get lucky and get a company that asks you more of like a project-based question, or like implement a to-do list with React, and maybe they're just going to watch you do that. But most of the time, it's more of these puzzle-y questions. So anyway, you're just going to basically need to know all these basic data structures: trees, linked lists, graphs, stacks, queues, matrices, and hash tables. Cracking the coding interview covers all these, and I actually talk about that later. But from reading the chat, it sounds like you guys are already hip to that book. So just learn these basic structures. You should know how to implement them from scratch, because sometimes the interview question kind of involves doing that. But also just because if you do that, you'll understand how they work really well. You should know the time space complexity, so that's big O notation stuff, of all the various operations on these data structures. So what is the big O of searching a binary tree? What is the big O of looking up something in a hash table? What is the big O of traversing an array or a linked list? Like these are things you need to know. Not always, sometimes it does not come up and it just doesn't matter. No one asks anything about big O. But sometimes it does come up because sometimes they might ask you like how you could improve the algorithm. If you wrote something that's, for example, n squared, maybe there's a way to do it in like n log n. If you, instead of having a nested for loops, maybe you could have like 2 separate for loops and a hash table as well. That's like a common thing. And then you just, and that might make your solution linear instead of quadratic. And just knowing that is good to know. Usually I don't get actually asked about big O directly. It's more like, how can you make this better? And then you talk about these kind of things. But usually they're not like, what's the time complexity? I usually have I don't think I've ever been asked that. All right, real examples of questions I've been asked. So I implement like search file functionality on a file system, and they kind of give you some helper functions. And then basically they're just saying, do you know how to traverse a tree? That's basically what that question is. I've also just been asked directly traverse a tree and call a function on each node, but that's calling a function on each node is easy. It's basically traversing the tree is what they're seeing if you can do. Write a function for balancing the parentheses. I've been asked that like twice, I think. That's like a really common question. That's one of those ones where you could just practice that question specifically because you actually might be asked that question. But some of the questions are more, you just have to have knowledge of the data structures, and then they're going to ask you a question you've never seen before, but because you know this list of data structures here, and you know that the problem is basically, let's say it's basically a tree traversal problem, even though the problem itself is something you've never seen, because you just generally know how to traverse trees, you'll be able to figure it out. That's how it usually is. But every now and then you get lucky and you get a question like balance the parentheses where you've just specifically practiced that question. That, by the way, it might not seem like it involves one of these fancy data structures, but the solution actually does involve a stack. So that's one of those things. If you didn't know about a stack in general, then you're probably just not going to be able to figure out how to do that question. Same with implementing search files on a file system, because files are structured in a tree-like structure in the file system. If you didn't understand how trees work, you're just probably not going to be able to do that problem. All right, but here's my advice. Always kind of follow this process or some variation of this process. Don't just start coding immediately, because probably you don't really even understand exactly what the question is. A lot of the times it's open-ended, so they actually expect you to ask clarifying questions, but also maybe you just misunderstood. So always start by clarifying and then come up with example inputs and outputs. So I love to do this where I just say like, so I'll write this out like, okay, if I called the function like this with this input, is this the output that you're expecting? And then they'll be like, yes, like, and then you'll be like, okay, I understand the problem. Or they'll be like, no, I meant more like this. So definitely don't just start coding, because it might be like 10 minutes before you and the interviewer realize that you didn't understand the question. So clarify that immediately. All right, also come up with edge cases, because you might be tripped up. A lot of times you'll finish the question and then they'll be like, all right, what about this input? And it just totally throws a wrench in your whole situation. So once again, just do this up front. Be like, okay, let's think of some edge cases. So like if I put in this input, this would be the output. And they'd be like, yeah, okay, what about this? And, edge cases are usually things, I mean, it depends on the problem, but, sometimes you can also ask, like, should I handle this type of edge case? Like, what if they put in an empty string? Like, maybe the algorithm had to do with the string. And you're like, well, what if they do an empty string? Like, what should I do? Should I just return nothing, or should I throw an error, or should I just talk about these kind of edge cases before you get started? All right, then I would do an outline. You could be the pseudocode, I guess, but you could also just kind of like draw out something if it's on a whiteboard and just kind of say like, I'm probably going to have maybe this helper function. This will call this, and then this will do this. And then kind of just get that figured out. And if the interviewer is like, yeah, that makes sense, it's a conversation. Okay. You're not just lecturing them on the solution because you don't even know the solution yet. So you're like winging this as you're going, and your conversation. So talk with them, be like, yeah, so then I'd probably call a function like this. And now they might not even make you implement that helper function, by the way. So that's like a cheat code that I use. Like I'll I'll just call some helper function. I'll be like, oh yeah, this trivial function, I'll just use that right here. And then they might not actually ask you to implement it. So you might be able to just, invent solutions out of other solutions that you didn't even have to implement. It's pretty cool. Now, but they might ask you to implement the helper function. So make sure that you know how to do that too. But I'm just saying sometimes you can get away with not doing that. That's happened to me before. All right, once you kind of get that all figured out, now you start implementing. Like I said, you can defer some helper functions potentially till later. They might not even ask you to implement it in the end. All right, now here's a crucial step that sometimes I forget to do. And then it comes up when they ask me to do it, or not. But really what you want to do is don't be like, okay, I'm done. Don't do that. Be like, all right, now that I've implemented it, let me walk through the implementation step by step with one of these example inputs we talked about earlier. And let's see if it actually produces that, and really go very step by step, as if you were moving step by step in the debugger, for example, where you like go line by line and like the state is kind of getting built up each line, and really kind of walk through that. And sometimes draw out the intermediate values like on the side. So like right now, X is 5, but then on the next line, X gets reassigned to something else. So then erase the 5 and write the new thing. You like actually keep track of the values of variables as you're walking through it. And then at the end, whatever you return like should be the thing that you said you would return for that endpoint. Now, what's probably going to happen though, is you probably have an error. You're probably wrong. You're as you're walking, because how often do you write code and it just works exactly as expected on the first try? So when you're on the whiteboard, same thing. It's going to probably not work exactly as expected. So that's why you do this process of walking through with input, because there's probably some bug that you fix. So anyway, once you go through that and you work through some of those edge cases too, you kind of at that point kind of ask the interviewer, be like, is there any other edge cases that we should test, or like this seems pretty good? And then they'll probably, because they're trying to move things along too, because usually you're tight on time, they'll be like, all right, that's good. Okay, now how could we make this better? They might ask you something open-ended, and depending on the problem, you'll have to figure out, that could be an algorithm thing, like different algorithms, or rearranging things, but it could also just be like an organizational thing, like where do you handle errors and what does that look like? Or like it could be a naming thing. How do you make the code more readable? It could be, you could interpret that a lot of different ways. They might be more specific about what they mean, but additionally, they might ask you if there's a lot of time left. They actually just might ask you a follow-up harder question, like, okay, and they'll throw a wrench in the situation, like, okay, what if it has to handle this kind of thing? Or what if it has to, I don't know. So you might have more coding to do, but that's basically the process. So if you kind of memorize this framework and practice it, it'll kind of make it less stressful when you get in there, because I don't know, you'll just have it's like you have a map that you can just follow instead of feeling like you're just totally winging it. You'll be like, okay, step 1, ask clarifying questions. And you'll be like, what do you mean by? And then it's like, all right, let me come up with input output examples. And then just now, like before you've even started coding, you've already like clarified a lot and figured out a lot. And you've already demonstrated to your interviewer that you are the kind of person that wants to figure out what is actually being asked of you before you just start implementing. And that's a good thing. They will respect that, but it's also going to make it easier for you. All right. So yeah, I would just, your process doesn't have to be exactly like this. This is just kind of what I do. And I think you should have something like this that you memorize and practice, that you can just, deliver on every time. You'll probably mess up at first. Like a lot of times when I was first doing this, I would forget one of these steps. Like I might forget to run through my code step by step. So I would like think I'm done. I'd be like, all right, I'm done. And then they'd be like, okay, so what would happen if we inputted this? And then I'd walk through it and be like, oh yeah, I guess that would be an error. So I guess I'm not done. And it just looks better when you're the one to think of testing it step by step without them kind of asking you to. So anyway, if you just are prepared, it'll just really look like you know what you're doing, and it'll really help you feel less stressed if you've kind of have this framework in place. All right. Now, sometimes you'll get asked in these whiteboarding interviews, you'll get asked a system design question as well, besides just the coding question. And you won't be writing any code probably for this. This is more like discussion based, where you're discussing the trade-offs of things with the interviewer. So, and they're just going to ask follow-up question after follow-up question, no matter what you say. So it's hard to even really give an example because it's a whole conversation. It's not just one question. But I do have some examples of like the questions that they asked me, but I just don't remember all of the follow-up questions, and I don't remember what I said. But this could involve drawing out diagrams of stuff too. Once again, ask clarifying questions, because they're probably going to ask you something extremely open-ended, and it could be a lot of different things, and you should really try to figure out what they're actually looking for. And just partly that's, I think, what this stage of the interview is they're kind of testing, like, do you know how to ask clarifying questions, and can you discuss trade-offs? All right, so real examples of things I've been asked. Design a REST API for a car dealership. So, okay, so like we should be able to maybe look up different car models and different makes and models. And okay, so let's make some URL paths, maybe like / model / like whatever ID or whatever. You just kind of like start drawing things out and kind of like asking them questions too, and just and maybe it'll, for whatever reason, based on what they ask you and what you say, it might just devolve or evolve whatever into a conversation about SQL databases versus NoSQL databases, and all of a sudden that's what you're talking about, and it really has nothing to do with cars at that point, right? But it'll start off something more open-ended, and then it might evolve into something else. But these are the kind of things that will come up. It probably also just has to do with what you know about and what you like kind of decide to start focusing on, because a question like that could be, if you're like a big AWS person, a lot of the AWS services, like you might approach it from that lens, and you'll be like, okay, let's do a serverless architecture with Lambdas, and let's have queues between these services. You kind of just draw like a diagram of like what it's going to look like in AWS. And like, that's a very different discussion than like asking things about the schema design and trying to figure out what kind of database you should use. So you can take this a lot of different directions. They might guide you, but probably not. Probably they're just going to go off of what you talk about, and they're just going to see how deep, can you go, basically, off of whatever you decide to kind of start talking about. All right. So I've also been asked to design the comment system for YouTube. So when users watch a video and they want to like post a comment, they're just like, design a comment system. And it's like, okay. And then, then no matter what you say, though, they're going to throw a wrench in it. I forgot what I even did. I think I just drew up a diagram of like a browser, and then I drew an arrow to like a web server, and I like drew another arrow, and they're like, all right, well, what if that server goes down? And it's like, all right, cool, we need like a load balancer in the middle, and then we need multiple servers, and then and then you can talk about caching, and then what if one of the caches is stale, and then, or what if this database goes down? And it's basically like, it's like a scale thing, like, can you handle the problems that come up on a project of scale? Because most real companies, their projects aren't just like a single Django app sitting in like a VPS and that's all it is. It's more than that. It's bigger, and things are harder to deploy when you have more parts and when you have to deal with scale. So they're kind of just seeing like, are you familiar with that idea, and can you talk about these things? All right, this is kind of more advanced though. I don't always get asked these kind of things. This might be more of like in a junior interview, they actually might not ask you stuff like this. I'm not sure. All right, behavioral interview. This is actually super important, so I didn't want to skip it. So, they're just trying to see, are you going to be chill to work with? Like, are you, can you work with people, basically? Are you going to be like not fun to have on the team? It's kind of like what they're trying to filter for. That's at least my interpretation of this. So they'll ask you things like, describe a situation where you had a disagreement with the team member. How did you resolve it? That kind of thing. And basically you want to just have some canned stories. Actually, that's what Cracking the Coding Interview recommends. Like, basically you come up with a couple stories that you could spin in slightly different ways in order to answer slightly different questions, because a lot of questions like could use the same story, but you would just tell it slightly differently. So like this one is about a disagreement with a team member, but another question, might be just about some other experience you have working on a project with people. And you could use the same story probably, actually. Like, for example, working on your capstone project, it might be the only team project you have. So you're going to have to come up with a couple different situations from that experience. And then that might be what, I don't know what you might have other experiences too, but just basically have like a few just ready to go. And then obviously spend some time making yourself sound good. Like, you don't want to be the asshole in the story. Like you want to be, and actually don't make someone else sound bad either. Like really, if you can tell it in a way that makes everyone sound good, like a conflict maybe happened, but everybody resolved it. Everything was fine. That would be ideal. I don't know. This is hard if you just don't have these kind of experiences. When I was first applying for jobs, these questions were really hard for me, but now I have more experience, so I just have more stories I can draw on. But it still helps to write them out kind of in practice, like a somewhat canned response, just so you're not, it's just one less thing to stress about if you just are prepared for these kind of things. You'll find a lot more examples. This is just the only one I can remember, but I would look up a lot of different kinds of questions like this, and you'll get the idea, and you'll kind of see that they're usually just drawing on experience working on projects with other people or just handling situations with other people. But it also might be very personal, like how do you approach certain situations, like, or how do you do your work, or like what kind of things do you prefer? And I don't know, just be honest, I guess, and be like political, I guess, too. Anyway, I have some general tips now. We're basically done with all the main sections of the interviews. Here's just some things to keep in mind. So a lot of the times it doesn't really matter if you get the answer right. It actually just matters, did you do better than the other people who are applying? Because they want to hire the best candidate. I mean, that's what they're going to do. They're going to hire the best candidate. So if nobody solved the problem because they just gave a really hard problem, they'll pick the person that did the best. So you could come out of that interview thinking like, oh, I did so bad, I didn't even finish it. But then you might get the offer. Because anyway, and the author of Cracking the Coding Interview, I don't remember if I read this in the book or if it was just like in like an interview or something with her, but she talked about how at Google, they did studies where they would actually ask their interviewees to guess how they think they did. And they found that there's no correlation between how someone thought they did and how they actually did. Because Google asks such hard questions that everybody just thinks they do bad. I mean, a lot of times, or maybe they think they do good, but then they don't get the offer for whatever reason. So there's just no correlation they find. So once you know that, then you can kind of like know that about yourself and be like, well, it doesn't really matter that I think I did badly. Who knows? I might get the offer. Because you just don't know how other people did. And if you get asked a really hard question, that's kind of a good thing because it's like, nice. That means a bunch of other people got asked a really hard question. And if you get asked a really easy question, it's like, well, what if everybody just solved it? And now it's like, it's just a total crapshoot who's going to get the offer because everybody solved it. So it's actually better to get asked a hard question, in my opinion, and then just hopefully you do pretty good on it, even if you don't finish it. And then hopefully just a lot of other people just completely failed it, and then you get the offer. So anyway, I don't think you should be like wishing for an easy question because everybody's going to get that question. And just think of all the people applying for it. They're all going to solve it. So you don't want that. You want to be the person who gets a hard question and does well. You don't want to be the person that gets asked an easy question and then random chance you are the one that they pick, because that's just not likely. All right. Yeah, don't discount the importance of the behavioral interview. So sometimes multiple people pass the technical interview. Well, so who are they going to pick? They're not going to be like, well, his solution was slightly more readable. Like, no, they're not going to do that probably. They're going to see it in their heads like these people both did good on the technical interview. And so then they're just going to look at how they like the person probably and be like, well, I really like this person. This person was cool and funny. Or they're going to go off of maybe experience if they have to, like that. I mean, that is just an unfortunate thing. They'll look at the resume at that point and be like, well, this person has more experience, so let's go with the more experienced person. But honestly, I think the behavioral interview is like a big deal. You want to be liked by them and friendly with them. So do like a ton of research on the company, in my opinion, and like just really kill it too with like asking them questions. Because part of the behavioral interview a lot of times is they will be like, do you have any questions for us? And now is your chance to just show that you like know everything about the company and you like are just gonna be able to like totally crush it. So I have a little anecdote here because I got the offer. Like I read my interviewer's PhD thesis before the interview because I just knew if I did that, I would get the offer, and I did. So I didn't even understand it, by the way. I just read it and then I asked questions about it. I didn't know anything about the topic. It was like some fancy machine learning thing. I never even took a machine learning class in college. So, but I just read it. And then I was like, oh yeah, by the way, I read your PhD. And then I asked some questions, and then we got into a whole conversation about machine learning stuff. And I was just learning things. And then, you know, afterward, they're probably just like, Evan's pretty cool. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's just, you just do things like that and you'll have a huge advantage. It's not that hard. Like that took me, you know, 1 hour of time to do that. And it just gave me this huge advantage probably over the other applicants. So why would you not do things like that? So in my opinion, actually, I think I say this on the next slide here. Yeah. So don't like apply to just tons and tons of jobs with like zero effort. Because in my experience, those just never work out. Like if you apply to hundreds of jobs and you just put in no effort, I think it's just almost never going to work out. Like every single one of those, you're just not going to you're either not going to hear back, or if you didn't put in enough effort, you don't have good questions, or you didn't study for like the kind of thing they're going to ask you to do, or you didn't go above and beyond on the take-home assignment. If you just put in low effort, it's just not going to work out. So my advice is just spend more time on fewer applications. That's my advice. Don't just spam with low effort. Because I tried that when I first graduated. Like I went to a boot camp before I went to college a long time ago, and I just spammed applications, and it just like nothing was working out. And then once I started like networking and trying more to go above and beyond on some of these things, that's when things started working out. And now I always do that. So after college, I did that. And now I always go above and beyond. So on take homes, I just want to have the best take home. Like I will put in more time and more work and more effort. I mean, I don't actually know what other people are doing, but in my head, I'm like, oh, I just put in more time and effort than all the other people. Like my take home is going to be the best one. And, you know, before the interview, I'm like, I'm going to learn everything I can about this company and everything I can about the people that are interviewing me. And just like, I'm going to just come in there like with the more knowledge than all the other applicants. And I don't know if I actually succeed in doing that, because maybe other people are doing this too. But I can tell you, I used to not do that and I knew nothing. And people would ask me things like, you know, what made you interested in this company? And it's like, I would just have some really bullshitty answer because I was actually just applying to every single job I found online and with zero effort. And I didn't even know what I was applying to. So I never had good answers for anything. I never had good questions when they would ask, do you have any questions for us? I'd be like, you know, I just like didn't even know what to ask because I really knew nothing about what the job was. So all I know is that when I changed my mindset and just started trying to outwork everybody else, it started working for me. And when I was spamming low effort applications, I just heard back from none of them. So I know some people say like, oh, it's a numbers game, so you just got to apply to as many as you can. But I don't think that works out, because it's like 0% chance that you'll get hired. So the numbers don't work out. You can apply to a million jobs, but it's a 0% chance on every single one of them. So just make it like a 5% chance and just apply to a much smaller number, and then you actually have a chance. All right, networking plays into that. So part of that effort I'm talking about is, you know, really actually making an effort to meet people. I once got a job when I was in college. It was a React native job, and I met this person who ended up hiring me in the hallway. Like we just started talking. It was just lucky. It was like a stroke of luck. But that just shows you, like, if you just talk to other people, opportunities can happen. And basically every job I've ever got pretty much came from me knowing someone and getting it. Like I have gotten a few offers, but I actually ended up taking other jobs. But I hardly ever get offers from like just cold applying to companies where I don't know anybody at them. Like it just doesn't work out very often. Like it's just I'm sorry to say it, like I know it's probably not what you want to hear, but it's just true. You just have to know this. You will be applying for months and months and never get anything if you don't change your approach. You need to meet people, and you need to get in the back door, and you need to put in more effort than everybody else and just come in strong. So that's my advice, and things changed for me when I started doing that. So anyway, I know it's hard to network, especially right now, but you just I don't know what I would do if I were you, but you got to do something. That's all I can say. All right. And then lastly, some people get really sour about the whiteboarding thing. They're like, oh, well, that's not what coding's like. Like I never have to use data structures. So like if someone asked me, I had a friend once in college, they were like, if someone asked me to whiteboard some data structure problem, I'm just going to walk out of the interview. Like they're just like really sour about that. That's how people interview. Like sorry, but that's how it is. Like, I just think of it like a game, and it's like, I like games and I'm competitive. So the way I think of it is like, I'm going to play this game and I'm going to try to win this game. Like, that's how I think of it. So I learned the algorithms, I practice it. I have a copy of Cracking the Coding Interview myself. You know, even though I took that data structures class in college, like I practice anyway, because I want to do good, you know, and just, you have to have that attitude, because if you're like, if someone asks you a data structure question and you're like, when would I need to do that? Like, they're not going to want to hire you. But if you're like, oh, nice. I like trees. Like, trees are cool. Let's traverse this tree. Like, then it's just, you're going to have a much better time. So don't get mad about it. Just treat it like a game. That's what I do. And last, I didn't know you guys already knew about this necessarily, so I had a slide for it because I really recommend this book. So sounds like you guys already know about it though. Definitely read the section on the behavioral interview stuff, because she goes into detail. Like, she talks about a whole framework for answering those questions, like situation, action, result. You know, like, first describe the situation, then describe the action you took, then describe the result that happened. Like, it's like that kind of thing. And you just, like, if you didn't know that, or once you know that, just like, you just feel more ready, and it's just less stressful, and you can just kind of, you know, use like these tried and true tricks to kind of like help you, you know, do a better job. But then also it's just like full of those data structure questions too, so you just can practice those. But I actually really like, before it gets into that, I like the stuff on the behavioral interview, also the stuff on how to prepare. There's some good advice at the beginning of the book before it gets into all the questions. So I would just read that whole section. Yeah. All right, that's my whole thing. So you guys have any questions for me?
Thank you, Evan. We are right at 1 o'clock. Boy, yeah, appreciate your presentation. We actually have a couple of minutes. And I think I'm going to go ahead and take off the recording at this point, since we're right at time. And we're going to continue this next week when we do our whole group. But if somebody has a quick question or two for, I guess, Evan or Matthew, now is the time. And I'll go ahead and just take off the recording at this point. And thank you both again. We really appreciate it.